The following podcast was originally recorded and released to the folks over on my Patreon on Wednesday, May 19th, 2021. And now I'm making it available to y'all as a bonus episode for Just Another Fanboy as you're sitting around waiting for season 5 to begin. Enjoy. Do you watch a lot of reality competition shows? If so, have you noticed the repeated usage of the word journey? Most every contestant, as they near the finale, mentions the journey they took to get where they are. Heck, even those that fail and leave the show early talk about the journey they took. I mean, journey. It's enough to make you want to pull out your own hair. I mean, I've gotten to the point that I'm so sick of the word that I don't even like to listen to the band Journey. Because here's the thing. There are other words in the English language that can be used. Sure, they may not be perfect, but still, they need to be tried out once in a while. Words like expedition, passage, tour, trek, or even peregrination. I just can't believe I'm here. To start out this peregrination as a simple fry cook, to suddenly be one of the last two up for the title, The Greatest American Onion Chef. I mean, it's been quite the expedition. See? Those work. So let's go, citizens of the world. Unite. Use a thesaurus. No more will we use the word journey to describe, well, our journey. Except for just now. But that's the last time. No more, ladies and gentlemen. No more. Anyway, with that out of the way, how about we get to the main topic of discussion in which I will talk about my podcast journey. Enjoy. Welcome to episode number 193 of my other podcast, the podcast that thinks it's funny, but isn't. Not really. I'm your host. You know me as Steven, but some folks call me Dad. And frankly, if I'm not your dad, stop it. Now, I know I've talked about this before, but if you subscribe to the Just Another Fanboy feed, as well as the Event or Else and Steven or Else feeds, well, I created a feed a long time back that might just be what you're looking for. It's called Everything or Else, and you can find it on pretty much every podcasting platform. Everything or Else has every episode of every podcast I've released since September of 2018. My other podcast, this one, of course, is the only exception, as this show is only for you, my patrons. I mean, I do release the occasional episode of my other podcast, like this episode here, over on one of the public feeds. But really, in the end, the full podcast is exclusive to you, the fine folks on my Patreon. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing up the Everything or Else feed today is that I was recently updating my stats. And in doing so, I needed to go through the list of podcast episodes on the Everything or Else feed. And it got me to thinking about the years I've been podcasting and thought it might be fun to reminisce. Because frankly, when it comes to creating podcasts, I can sometimes get distracted by shiny ideas and start and stop stuff now and again. So my podcast peregrination actually begins back in 2006. I recorded my very first podcast episode on August 29th, 2006. What led to that point was sometime in 2006, I had discovered podcasts, and I'd been listening to shows like iFanboy and Comic Geek Speak. And I thought it would be fun to throw my hat into the podcast ring, but I really had no idea how to get started. Well, somebody that I knew online, an online friend, had told me about this dude that was creating he wanted to create like a podcast network / broadcasting channel or something. Anyway, he called it Links Broadcasting. And he was just looking for folks, whether they had podcasting experience or not, who would want to come join his team. And so I sent him an email and told him I'd like to do a comic book podcast. I'd like to talk about comics. the idea for the podcast I have is called Just Another Fanboy. And he said, that's fine. You're on board. And I told him, I said, I'll admit I've never done it before. I don't even know how to get started. And he said, let me send you some stuff. And he sent me an email with links to various things like the Audacity software that you can get free online and some tutorials on how to use Audacity. And I went to Walmart and I bought your basic $10 desktop microphone, and I sat down and I recorded my first episode.
Just like a comic book, just like a comic book, just like a comic book, just like a comic book.
This episode was recorded for release on August 29th, 2006. My name is Steven, and I am a comic book fan. There, I said it, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Regardless of how my mother might happen to feel about a grown man who spends his money each month on funny books, I'm one of the proud few who is willing to take a stand on that thin line between what is considered cool and what is always considered by the unenlightened masses as the hobby of middle-aged overweight single guys who live in their parents' basement. I'm here to stand upon that line and shout out that yes, I am middle-aged. Yes, I am overweight. But no, I do not live in my parents' basement. I'm a happily married man who just happens to enjoy the sweet caress of a well-written illustrated story now and again.
So yeah, it was fairly horrible, but I got it recorded. I sent it to him and he liked it. In fact, he said, keep it up, do more. But he obviously didn't like the way it sounded as far as the quality, because within a week, I had gotten from him in the mail a Samson USB microphone, a really nice one. And so after about episode 3, 4, 5, somewhere around there, I started using the new microphone. He also sent me my very first iPod for free, just this red iPod Nano out of the blue. It was a pretty awesome time. Now, I did the Just Another Fanboy podcast originally back then from 2006 to 2008. And it by itself went through many different variations. It started out as a single host podcast, just me. I was not reading comics weekly at the time. I was getting them sent to me monthly in the mail. So I didn't have new comic books to read and then talk about on the show every week. So I started out by just reading the solicitations of the books that I was getting. And to try to make it at least interesting, I read the solicitations in silly voices. And then eventually, within the first few episodes, I started introducing characters to the show. I did silly voices of these various characters, and I did the occasional sketch. And that's how the show was for 25 to 30 episodes. Eventually, my wife came on at one point, I think during our Valentine's Day episode. She came on to celebrate episode number 25. I think she was on our Valentine's Day episode, and the listeners really liked her. So then she came on as a co-host for a number of episodes. Me and my wife, it was like something we both looked forward to each week. We'd sit down and they were very long episodes. I'd talk about comics. We'd talk about the family. You know, it was kind of a very personal podcast, and a lot of people seemed to really like it. But eventually she kind of got a little bored with it. She had other things she wanted to do, so she left the show. It went back to being a single host podcast. It didn't release weekly at that point. It just released whenever I could sit down and record something. Eventually then I added another co-host, so not my wife, but somebody else I knew who read comics, and they came on over Skype. And then I added a second co-host. So it was like me and two guys doing the show for a number of episodes until I eventually had to stop podcasting in 2008 because I just didn't have time anymore. I didn't have time to do it. I mean, honestly, it wasn't a good time. I shouldn't have been podcasting at that point in time. My kids were very young, and I was spending a lot of time doing the podcast when I should have been spending my time with them. And by 2008, that fact had become known to me. It's not something I stumbled on myself, but once I came to that realization, I stopped podcasting, and I didn't start podcasting again for 10 years. Between that time, though, while I was not podcasting, I started writing. And I actually self-published my first book in 2014, and then two others one in 2018 and 2019. I bring this up because once I had started writing and self-publishing, I had created a Patreon for that. I'd started that back in 2018. And if you go back, if you're on the Patreon, if you go back and you sort the posts by oldest first, you'll find that all of the original posts for a while are just all about my books or serials, books that I published, books that didn't go anywhere, serials that didn't go anywhere, serials that became books. You know, it was kind of fun going back recently and looking through a lot of that stuff. But on August 7th, 2018, I had asked the patrons, what can I do for you? Those of you who were around at the time, y'all were paying. I mean, those of you who are around now, you're paying now as well. But I didn't feel like I was giving everybody the biggest bang for their buck. So I asked, what can I do to make this worth it to you? And then maybe pull in some other patrons. Well, one of the patrons at the time suggested that I start posting audio files, maybe brainstorming sessions, ideas of what I was going to write, maybe read short snippets of my books or stories, just regular updates. And so I started looking into doing that. By this point, even though I still had that really nice microphone, I wasn't able to record at home. I didn't have the time. I was working 2 jobs. And again, the whole reason I had stopped podcasting in the first place was because it was taking me away from family time. And if I'm working 2 jobs, if I'm home is family time. And that's just the way it was. So I started looking into how I could use my phone to record these audio updates while I was sitting in my car during break or lunch at one of my 2 jobs. And I posted my first test recording for the Patreon on August 13th of 2018. And then by August 15th, I had posted my first official update that I had recorded while sitting in my car while on break at the second job. Okay, hello. This is me in my car at break at the old night job. This is going to be the first of hopefully many audio type updates or just whatever the heck I feel like talking about. I'm not going to schedule these. You're not going to have every week you'll get a new update because I don't always have time to do stuff like this. And I may not have anything to say every single week, or maybe I have so much to say that I do 2 or 3 a week. Who knows? But these will come out when they come out. About the only thing I really have to talk about at this point in time is the subject of Westerns. So I've been watching a lot of Westerns recently. I started out watching a documentary called The Old West, executive produced by Robert Redford. Then it was an okay Western, or okay documentary. Learned some stuff I hadn't known before, but it got me in the mood to watch some Westerns. So I started watching Westerns. After that, I posted 3 more audio updates for the patrons. And by that point, I was pretty much hooked. I was starting to get that itch because I remembered how much fun I used to have back in the day podcasting. And so I began thinking about moving from Patreon only audio updates to a full-fledged podcast. And my first thought, of course, was just to bring back Just Another Fanboy. I decided instead, however, at the time, to start a whole new podcast called the Stephen or Else Podcast. Because honestly, I already owned the StephenOrElse.com URL where I'd been blogging and such for the past 10 years. And so on September 6th, 2018, I released my first episode of the Stephen or Else Podcast. You're listening to the Stephen or Else Podcast, Episode 1, a Big Beard Books production. Welcome to the Stephen or Else podcast. I am, of course, Stephen, your host, and this is the first episode of this new podcast from someone who hasn't podcasted in probably a decade. I have a lot of stuff, a lot to get into, and very little time to do it. The first episode is going to be more of a what's going on here. So we have three main questions that need answering in this podcast. First off, of course, what is the podcast all about? The second, for those who remember me podcasting over a decade ago, how will this podcast differ from the Just Another Fanboy podcast? And the third question, for those who don't know me at all, who the crap am I? Once I started releasing those, I had started to record at what at the time I was calling half episodes. For example, the Stephen or Else podcast, episode 4.5, and I would release those exclusively on the Patreon. I felt this was all an idea of the patrons. I should give them something that's just for them. That didn't last long, however. And so on October 1st of 2018, I had released the first episode of my other podcast. Now, sometime around February of 2019, I actually started thinking of starting a new podcast in addition to both Stephen or Else and my other podcast. Because, two podcasts weren't enough for me back then because, I don't like to think things through. I had decided around that time that I'd wanted to read through all the Marvel events, starting with Marvel Superhero Secret Wars. And I thought that maybe I'd podcast about it. And originally the idea was to put them on Stephen or Else. But then the more I started thinking about it, it's like, do I want to do one episode per event? Or what I started leaning to was one episode per issue. And then I thought, well, I should bring the DC events into it as well and just do a whole new podcast. In addition, again, to what I was already doing. And so on February 27th, 2019, I released the first episode of Event or Else. And in case you're confused, here's some spoilers. I did end Event or Else after 15 episodes and then started it up all over again as a video show just a couple months back. Because, I have issues. So by the end of February 2019, I was doing the Stephen or Else podcast, my other podcast, and Event or Else. But as summer drew near, I had some decisions to make. If you remember, I was recording all of these shows in my car. And once summer hit, it was just going to be too freaking hot. That was unless I wanted the engine and the fan sound to be part of the show. And I tried that out. I tested that out a few times, but that's not what I wanted to go for. Also, by this time, I had begun getting rather tired of the format of the Stephen or Else podcast. I'm not sure why. I know I was getting a bit nostalgic for the old Just Another Fanboy days because I was thinking about those days when I would do the silly voices and the occasional sketch. And I was thinking that I wanted to try adding some of that to the show. Now, for some reason, I decided that if I was going to start adding that stuff to the show, I couldn't do that I had to start a whole new show over, basically is what my thought process was. Again, I got issues. But then I discovered something that kind of saved me that summer. Our local library had a full-fledged recording studio in the basement that you could use for free as long as you had a library card. And you could use it 4 times a month. Well, that pretty much cinched it. I would stop recording on my phone in my car and record instead at the library each week. I got 3 hours per session and 4 sessions a month, so I figured I could easily record 3 shows a week in those 3 hours. And then I discovered that I couldn't. Regardless, I stopped doing the Stephen or Else podcast and began writing and recording the new Stephen or Else, which was a whole new show with sketches and all that junk. I have to admit, for me, the new Stephen or Else, it's always been the most fun I've ever had with podcasting. But the fact is, doing a show like that each week by myself, writing and performing and editing, it's pretty much impossible. However, the first episode landed on July 2nd, 2019, and to date, I've only done a total of 14 episodes, which kind of speaks to that whole impossibility thing. And honestly, not all 14 of those episodes have had sketches and whatnot. they've been fillers just so I could try to get an episode out that week, until I finally just kind of came to the conclusion that you're just not going to be able to put out a new episode of Stephen or Else each and every week. You're not going to feel creative each week. You're not going to have the time to write. You're not going to have the time to record. So when the inspiration comes, write something, record it, put it out there. As I was coming to this realization, and as I was slowing down the amount of Stephen or Else podcasts I was putting out, it was also around this time that I put up the last episode of that first incarnation of Event or Else, which meant that I had some time on my hands. I mean, here I was trying to do 2 podcasts that I literally had to write each week, and it was just too much. Something, of course, had to give, and it gave pretty much all the way. So I went back to basics, and I relaunched Just Another Fanboy on August 8th, 2019. I was still clinging to Stephen or Else and Event or Else. I didn't close them down and still release an episode here and there. But eventually I put all my focus in Just Another Fanboy. The idea for this ended up being shorter, 15 to 20 minute episodes about whatever. It was, after all, a celebration of all the things I love most in life, such as family, comics, TV, movies, music, books, and writing, and even other podcasts. And so with Just Another Fanboy, I basically gave myself permission not to worry about what I was going to talk about or how I was going to talk about it. In fact, by that point, I was back to podcasting in my car, and I was able to, at first, do 5 episodes a week. And you can bet that I did. I eventually backed that down to 3 a week, and now 2 a week. And maybe in the near future, I'm going to take it down to once a week. But considering that when I first brought the show back, the plan was to have long episodes once a month so I could still talk about comics and such while doing Stephen or Else, I think once a week is just fine. And then, of course, I rebooted Event or Else this past March. Now, the reason I did that was because I'd been looking to do a video show on YouTube for quite a while now, and Event or Else just seemed to fit what I was looking for, and so I did it. This time, however, I didn't just jump in like I have been doing for the past couple of years. I had, for example, the first 4 episodes ready to go before I started, and I plan on taking at least a month off between seasons so that I can start each season ahead. And if you're not aware, each season is an event. Season 1, which we're in now, is Marvel Superhero Secret Wars. Season 2 will be Crisis on Infinite Earths, and so on and so on. But still, with all that said, I am still really longing to do more Stephen or Else. In fact, I've written and recorded in episode 15, which I've only released on Patreon, but I'm not 100% happy with that, and I'm thinking of doing some tinkering. But eventually I will be releasing the occasional episode of Stephen or Else. And there it is. That's my podcasting peregrination, or journey, to be more exact. It's a bit all over the place, and it's going to continue to be all over the place, which is why I would suggest to anyone interested in listening to anything I might put out there to subscribe to Everything or Else. It has the original versions of the Stephen or Else podcast and Event or Else. It has Just Another Fanboy and the new versions of Stephen or Else and Event or Else. The only thing it doesn't have is my other podcast and the old Just Another Fanboy episodes from 2006 and 2008, but that's only because I've lost most of those episodes. In fact, if you look there now, as of the time I'm recording this, there are 283 episodes over there. 283 episodes in just over 2.5 years, and that's not including the 192 episodes of my other podcast. I mean, yeah, it does include a few of them because, again, I have released some of them over there on the Just Another Fanboy feed and the Stephen or Else feed. But still, that's 475 episodes in, we'll just say 3 years. That's 158 episodes per year, or about 3 episodes a week for 3 years. Not bad for a dude that's doing it all by himself. I'm out.
Take a look around.
There it is, folks. My Other Podcast, episode number 192, which, again, I released just for my patrons on Wednesday, May the 19th. But I wanted to give it to you guys since we're taking this time off between seasons, which, as a reminder, season 5 of Just Another Fanboy comes back on June 10th. The first episode of season 5, I'll be talking about the first episode of Loki over on Disney+. As usual, I would like to invite y'all to come over and join me on the YouTube show Event or Else, in which I'm going through most every major Marvel and DC event, one issue at a time, one episode at a time. You can find that over on YouTube. Go to eventorelse.com or go to get.eventorelse.com, and that'll tell you where you can find it, because you can watch the videos on YouTube, you can watch the videos on Facebook, and then you can get the audio version, the podcast, pretty much anywhere you get podcasts. But if you just go to eventorelse.com, it'll tell you where to find the show. We're really close to wrapping up season 1, in which I'm talking about Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, and then we'll be coming back later with season 2, in which I'm going to talk about Crisis on Infinite Earths. Until then, folks, enjoy the break that you're having. Well, don't enjoy it. Be sad. Be sad that you're having a break. Be happy that you're getting something during the break, but be sad that you're not getting something else during the break, I guess I'm going to say. Until then, until we come back in June, my name is Steven, and I'm just another fanboy. Be nice to each other.
Bye-bye, Daddy.
Bye-bye, Daddy.
Good job.